Thank you. Hey, everybody. So I guess I do have a couple of hats in a sense. I'll tell you a little bit, if I may, about Mental Health Collective, which I'm the founder and director of first. So we are a small startup and not-for-profit, which is the only agency from the not-for-profit space that's solely focused on the social and collective dimensions of mental health. And I came to that looking at mental health from my background as a social anthropologist, so with a focus on culture and relationships and the similarities and differences that human beings have across the world from different cultures, and how that informs the way that we live and interact together. But also as someone who manages a quote-unquote severe and enduring mental health condition. The psychiatrists have such a lovely way with words, don't they? But from that, I've kind of been on the sharp end of mental health services of various kinds, including being sectioned under the Mental Health Act. So I have a really strong kind of theoretical and practical interest in social relationships and inclusion, but very much from a sort of lived as well as a professional point of view. And since we started Mental Health Collective in 2018, all of our work has been focused on inclusion and finding ways to ensure that people such as myself and individuals across society, especially those who get sent the message that they don't belong and get sent the message that they're not equal, in terms of the regard that they're held and the value that they bring to society, how their humanity can be recognised and appropriately valued. So I thought I might tell you about a couple of projects that we've developed which speak to those themes and reflect on the question I was asked to address in this session, which is about how the voice of the individual in personal relationships and communities might affect change in how care and support could be delivered equitably. And in the first part of that question, how might an individual play a part? My first answer would be, actively, really. So when I was sectioned myself, I was literally dragged kicking and screaming by the police outside my house in kind of full view of the neighbours. It was horribly dramatic and really, really quite awful. And, as you'd expect, like quite a humiliating experience and something that I felt very deeply ashamed of, and that I felt that, with all my neighbours looking on and seeing the commotion, was a point of huge vulnerability for me. And I remember my mum saying, it's just one of those things, it doesn't matter, don't worry about it. You don't have to feel weird about going back to that community afterwards. But, that was just going in one ear and out the other. I didn't listen to it whatsoever, as this will be a hugely shocking experience for my mum. But one thing that happened a couple of days after that was that a neighbour put a card through our front door, just wishing me well and sending their best, their best hopes for me, and effectively communicating the message: you do still belong in this community. Nobody is going to force you out. You're still welcome. You're still part of you're still part of this. And it meant so much, and it really landed with me. I mean, this is it. And I still have it, and it still really matters to me, even all these years later. And it sowed the seed of an idea, which was what active role communities can play, and particularly strangers, actually, to give those messages of care and support when people are vulnerable, and to give messages that land. And out of that, we created a project called Kindness by Post, which it's like a kind of secret Santa for kindness, effectively. So members of the public can sign up to send a card, often a homemade card, with a message of goodwill or encouragement to someone they don't know. And then they have someone allocated to send a card to them. So it's like a ginormous secret Santa where you have these usually very lovely, beautiful, kind of heartfelt messages which are sending to someone that they don't know, and then everyone kind of makes themselves vulnerable, I suppose, and willing to kind of receive some kindness too. And I think that's been a really interesting exercise for me, listening to the feedback that we got from that. I mean, it's an intervention without any exclusions, and everyone's welcome to join. But we have found that it's resonated particularly with people with disabilities, those who've got mobility issues and who are housebound, who might not be able to access many of the face-to-face interventions that are designed to tackle loneliness, etc. And obviously, 65 pence for a stamp is a relatively accessible amount of money, obviously less than a bus fare, which means that it's been popular and taken up by a much larger and more diverse number of people than we'd expected. And from the feedback we had from people, they talked a lot about having a sense of agency, and often people a large number who've experienced mental health difficulties themselves, some very much in the more extreme end of the spectrum, and who are saying that they feel a sense of agency, feel a sense of being able to contribute, and that sense of care being out there, not knowing where these messages were coming from specifically, because they're sent. We obviously have full details, but as far as the recipient's concerned, they don't know who it's from. That creates a sort of sense of there is hope out there, somewhere out there is somebody who does care for you, and that being quite a powerful experience. And when University College London evaluated it as an initiative, they found significant positive results on impact for well-being, loneliness, hope, and belonging. But it was the belonging part that was the strongest in terms of those outcomes. And we think that's really interesting, but we think that's partly to do with having that active role, and having a sense that you're not just being done to, you're not being delivered the care, but you're actively creating a collective achievement whereby all these different people do what's clearly a small thing, making that gesture of goodwill towards somebody else, but taken together, all of those small things add up to something that feels quite powerful as a thing to be part of. So I found that a really, really interesting. It's really challenged my assumptions, I have to say, as an organizer of that project, and it's made me reflect on how we might, on a larger, more ambitious scale, develop a sense of belonging across the country, which tackled that sense of exclusion in a really assets-based way. So our overarching strategy for Kindness by Post is to, throughout the year, run a number of different exchanges which are targeting and really focusing on the assets that specific communities can bring in terms of sharing goodwill and solidarity when people are in difficulties. So, for example, we'll be working with Black majority churches during Easter to run a kind of Lent exchange to draw on the messages that Black majority churches are so well equipped to share. And we'll do an exchange during Ramadan, working with the Muslim community again around how the themes of Ramadan can offer so much to the wider community. And we're working with disability charities and also with care homes and older people's groups at other points in the year to run exchanges which look at themes of resilience and words of wisdom, which those groups are particularly well equipped to take a leadership role in. And then we're creating a new tradition, a new nationwide tradition called Great British Valentine, when all of the groups who've taken part in those exchanges across the year will come together and we'll have one major national moment, the Great British Valentine, where, effectively the messaging of that is a mode of Britishness, and a part of what it means to be part of this society together is that kindness and that compassion and that sense that everyone can play a part in making that happen. So so we're quite excited about that, and we're excited as well that it can continue in an uncompromised way in the age of COVID, where sending and receiving messages isn't through the post is something that can still be done safely, and we're excited to look at offering it in the context of local lockdowns as well, where suddenly you've got communities who can no longer benefit from the freedom that the rest of Britain might have, and go back into a lockdown situation and to run local exchanges for people who are in that situation. So that was certainly an eye-opener for me in terms of how can individuals play that part. My answer is actively and collectively on that. Another kind of major challenge that we've taken on is reflecting on those who are sectioned under the Mental Health Act and how they can be treated with the dignity and the respect that they deserve. And as I mentioned, I was sectioned myself, and in common with, unfortunately, the majority of people who are detained under the Mental Health Act, I shared an experience of not being treated with dignity, and finding the whole experience like a deeply degrading and frankly horrendous process, like at a time when I was obviously at my most vulnerable. And I was privileged to take on the role of chair of the Dignity and Safety group during Simon Wesley's review of the Mental Health Act. And in that role, we were given a lot of witness statements and evidence from hundreds and thousands of individuals who had been detained, and obviously the testimony that they gave was utterly chilling to the bone, and I'm sure I don't need to tell you guys as professionals working in this arena what the kinds of things that you might hear. But there was one story that stuck with me particularly, where a woman described how the police had come for her and they were trying to take her away from her home, and she didn't want to be aggressive towards them or to appear aggressive in any way, but she didn't want to go. She didn't want to be taken, and the only way that she could think of to try and make sure that they wouldn't take her was to take all her clothes off. So she stripped herself completely naked and said, "Oh well, I think they won't take me if I'm naked. They wouldn't dream of taking me naked." But of course, that didn't work. They will still take you when you're naked. And so she was taken completely naked. And the staff members who undertook that task failed to pick up any of her clothes from the floor. And she went, first to a police cell and then to a secure unit with no clothing whatsoever, because nobody had thought to bring it. And she was given only a blanket for 24 hours. And I just felt so strongly that was a really deep misinterpretation, not exactly of her voice, because I don't know, it sounded like from what she was saying that she didn't have the words at that time, that she wasn't able to have her voice to communicate what she needed, but she was expressing herself with her body. And I think that often when we make the presumption that listening to people is about listening to what they say with their voices, we forget completely that people also communicate with their bodies, with their mannerisms, with their behaviour, with their cultural objects, with all sorts of physical things that you have to be more active in terms of your listening and a bit more imaginative in the way that you're interpreting, so that you can hear that communication and that message. And it was really interesting. We've been running training for a while, both with approved mental health professionals and also with allied professions such as the Metropolitan Police. And when I ran a training with them, they were saying how, it was very common for individuals that they encountered when they were being sectioned to soil themselves. And truthfully, when those officers encountered that, of course, they were disgusted by that gesture and found that very, personally affronting, difficult thing to deal with. And and we were sort of we were playing with that and exploring it a bit more, and considering that that was a gesture of fear, that was a gesture of retreat, and of it wasn't an act of disrespect necessarily to the officers concerned. And so when the officers reacted with disgust and reacted as if it was a hostile irritation and a cuss to them, that accelerated a kind of anxiety vortex whereby that vulnerable individual felt more threatened and felt like they were going to be abandoned, and the trust unravels entirely, basically, and then things only escalated. And that's something we've seen time and again from people who are held under the mental health act, that once that trust starts to unravel, it goes quicker and quicker and more irreparably. And I think we've certainly heard evidence that for people of Black, Afro-Caribbean and African descent, that those miscommunication issues seem to be much more intense, and that their behaviour gets interpreted as aggressive or interpreted as hostile in ways that might not be made. There are assumptions made that wouldn't carry across in the white population. And I have to say, for me myself, the police officer who dragged me away from my 8-month-old baby, and who, frankly, I thought he was a horrible, horrible man at the time, and then found out several months later that he had disobeyed a direct order from his superintendent or whatever, the person in charge, the superintendent had said, "You must drag this woman into the cells right now because she's taking up too much of your time." And he said, "No, I'm not, let me reason with her. Let me see if I can get her to come willingly." So he acted completely for my benefit. But would he have done that if I didn't have white skin and a middle class accent and a baby and all that stuff? Frankly, I doubt that very much. So that's kind of rubbish. In terms of tackling this kind of problem, and I know it will come as no surprise to you. So there you go. But we explored, when we were working with professionals and reflecting on the kind of best practice elements of it, we found, there isn't a kind of magic bullet. It's a 1,000 little things that makes the difference for people in communities to feel like they're heard, to feel like they're seen, and feel like the care and support they're given is demonstrating respect for their humanity, and managing the inevitable power relationship and power disparity that vulnerable people feel when they're engaging with caring agencies. And I think we noticed when talking to those professionals that so often, people had come into those professions with often coming from a lived experience perspective themselves, and very much with a strong sense of values that was in it, of course, to recognise people's humanity and to help. But then through the course of having to survive, doing their jobs in an incredibly hostile system, undervalued, underfunded, pressurised constantly, not with enough time, not necessarily, sometimes having to follow protocols and processes that weren't in keeping with their own personal values, they developed a set of defences, and sometimes the defences were working against the kinds of things that they would otherwise do on a kind of human-to-human level, to click out of kind of professional mode and step into I'm just being here as a person when I come to you. It's that kind of closing down thing. I don't know, but I imagine that many of you will be sort of sitting at home closing down a little as I speak, because that's the thing you can do in a conference which is all held by webinar, right? You can get away with closing off, making a cup of tea. Maybe you're on the loo at the same time as you're listening to this. Who knows? No one can know. But when we're in that kind of private space, whether it's in our homes or whether it's when we're not being overlooked by a colleague, or we've got some kind of when we're not being held accountable by somebody else, I think all of us have that capacity to glaze off and lose our humanity for a moment and shut down. And like I certainly do when my children are moaning and moaning and moaning, like there's this sort of glaze that falls across me in the way that I respond to them. However, I think we all know as well how you can come back from that state. And in terms of that shift, in terms of the personal relationships, I think that one thing we can do is identify as carers and as professionals who are intervening in environments, how do we notice when we have slipped into that kind of like zombie, protected, self-guarded, humanity's evaporated from our eyes mode, and what would be a sort of touchstone to get it back? And like for me personally, like it literally is a touchstone. So it's this elephant here. I won't tell you the backstory to this elephant, the significance of the elephant, but I use it and I keep it in the office for when we're doing kindness by post and someone again is complaining about this issue that's come up a bunch of times, and like I've got that glazed off feeling in my face, and it helps me remember why I'm doing it, remember where it came from, remember that I'm dealing with an individual who's got a personal story and who's coming from a particular place. And I find that when I'm engaging more wholly and with integrity and bringing my whole self to this work, then I'm better able to recognize like the whole of the person that I'm engaging with too. So that's that basically. And yeah, if anyone wants to if you guys come have a local lockdown and you want to do kindness by post with us, or if you want to do training for helping professionals bring more humanity in their work with people who are being held under section, then hit me up. I'm done.
Amy, thank you. Excellent. Really great there to give us that perspective of acceptance and community and participation by communities, and then to bring it to the individual level and the importance of professionals building trust and really deeply understanding how people need to be heard and seen and valued as equal, actually, and how difficult that is in that environment where professionals are interfacing with individuals. Thank you. So let's broaden it now from that scope of individuals to bring in Hilary Armstrong, Baroness Armstrong of Hilltop, who perhaps can give us a perspective of, well, some years of experience, if you don't mind me saying, Hilary Armstrong, but also some positions of influence and power, as Amy referred to. So let's bring it to that level now and hear from you in terms of how you feel we can address these issues.